This is IBM Museum. Still off camera here. I've got the Model 70 set aside for the moment. We'll bring it back up and power it as the later portion of this video. But I do have the Model 30 out in a side view right now because this is the video or a little bit of a series I'm going to do on the external diskette drives of the PS2s. The methods of going through and connecting up an external drive, and in this instance is referring to the IBM methods as well. I will have a later video in the series that I'll cover the thing like the Sysgen bridge card adapters of the third-party stuff. But we're going to go over the IBM external diskette drives. I'm going through, it's a time in the afternoon where I start getting the sun coming down, coming through the window, and just lighting up my filming area in ways that I don't like. But I can do the short shot. We're gonna move in a little bit on the Model 30 as we continue, and I'll start with that portion of showing how what the systems have on the inside, the various systems of PS2s to connect up that external drive. Okay, getting in a little bit low and tight on the Model 30, and hopefully just a little bit out of that sun's glare off to the left. In this case, I'm going through, it's a side view of the Model 30 to show that this is a very common external connection method you'll find for the Model 30, and that's the original 8086 CPU-based units that this is commonly found on, although you will find it on the higher end Model 30 286 a little bit, and we did see it on that Model 25, the 8086 based that I had open as well, a unit that was evidently used by IBM, an IBM employee internally, had that had this adapter on there as well, but it was very uncommon. And this is and you'll see very similar features to the microchannel passive pass-through adapter that I'll show later on. We did see that a little bit with the Model 70. As I say, we'll have the Model 70 up and actually even go to the point of powering up that unit just to, as we go through and run through the diskette and install the drivers or the software that's needed for that replacement diskette adapter A. And we'll go over that kind of comprehensively. Now, in this case, besides the chips just for taking the signal through the adapter, and this is another way that IBM had for the Model 30 just to get that internal connection, and I'll show how that was done here in a moment, to the outside. And this does have also a ROM BIOS extension. There's not even all that much code that is on this for the system basically to recognize or to adapt to having this particular pass-through board on the system. Now, there were Model 30 units, of course, when it initially came out. That was the ISA model of the more conventional release, the non-microchannel system that was in that initial IBM PS2 release in 1987. And the Model 30 was treated as a little bit of a a replacement for the PC XT, maybe even the IBM AT in some cases. So they had that along the lines. They had basically the XT slots that were in the system, so that people could move up from running that IBM XT to going over to using, and it was a bridge model basically over to the PS2 line that businesses could have for their employees without necessarily going to the higher level microchannel. And with those PS2s introducing the 3.5-inch diskette drives, there were the thought that employees needed the ability, or people need that ability, to get that media from the older 360 KB media that was common with the PC XT over to being able to run it on this new PS2 model. Now, I actually have and I do have an adapter installed just to kind of demonstrate here, and it's not connected up to the cable. I do have the A drive removed in this instance just to show that I've got a floppy drive in that B position on the system. Now, the hard drive cable is disconnected. I don't have the hard drive in on this system at the moment. And if you want to really try to have a hard time finding something, look and see if you can find one of these 44 pin. It's not a standard 40 pin. It has 4 extra pins. See if you can find connectors to replace if you have where you had the proprietary hard drive that you'd come on. You basically just have to go through and find these by the FRUs in the old IBM supply areas to be able to get one of these, because the individual pieces to make your own, I mean, you can find ribbon cable easy enough, but finding these insulation displacing connectors is a challenge. But off the thought of the hard drive is not on the system. This would be the bezel that would be in front of that B bay if it had the hard drive instead of the diskette drive installed for that B position. And of course, this is the bezel. In this case, big button floppies. So Model 30 normally came with the 720 KB diskette drives, even though we've gone through and replaced those with the 1.44 megabyte drives with no issues. But they had the big buttons, and we'll get into the internal diskettes of the PS2s at a later point. I'll show all the buttons, the big buttons, small buttons, the markings on the buttons, and show how those diskette drives connect up to the systems, whatever cabling they need. But that's in a later separate series in this case. We're going to deal with the external diskette drives for now. So that hard drive connector is behind here. It's out of the system right now. We're going through with the theory that if we had a 2 diskette drive system, Model 30, which was halfway common back in that time frame, but we're going through where we got this boxed up adapter, and it's got all the instructions and the inserts for putting in that IBM manual for adding this into a Model 30 system, as our example here. And it's kind of innovative. This is the first that I really saw of how innovative IBM could be with how they design things. And hopefully we're getting a little bit too much sunlight coming through, playing on our camera lens, I know, for you guys to make it, I'll try and block that out a little bit. And we get these other warts and all, like I say. I'm going to hang a coat off the side. I don't want to cut. I don't want to do another take. I just want to roll with this. And this sun will go down relatively quick as well. If we can go through, we'll get that blocked out of the from interfering with our video here. But as I continue on, so this was the IBM actually has the diskette drive cable, and even if you had a 1 drive or 2 drive system, they always include the same cable. They didn't make a different version. This had one connection for this, and this being for the A drive, this being for the B drive, and the planar connection is right in the middle. It's closer to the A drive section, and it does have that twist in the cable for the A drive, just as you would expect to see on the older PC series diskette drives internally. And then the B drive connector being on this longer section connected over here. And these are these 40-pin edge connectors that were common on the Model 30s as well. And some of the higher end units once you got into the 1.44 megabyte drives. But removing that B drive cable from the back of the drive, and it's actually got the twist and folds in these cables. We even get an IBM FRU part number, in this case 68X2827. And the way that these cables were folded, you went through and were able to, let me see, I haven't taken this one, but the folds worked out to being very similar to get them over into the position where, and it typically didn't matter where you had this adapter in the 3 slots available on these Model 30s for off the riser. And of course there was the lithium battery that was kind of unique to the Model 30 on the riser to run the real-time clock. It didn't hold, it wasn't for any configuration of the system, but it was to run the real-time clock only. The unique real-time clock, different from all the other PS2 models. And the Model 30 and Model 25, those original versions, they were unique, that when you powered them on, the system went through and it configured itself basically without having to change any jumper settings or anything like that. Didn't depend on that configuration being stored in a non-volatile place somewhere, and would go through and configure itself. And then it had a register that was kind of unique in the motherboard circuitry that went through and listed what planar functions were disabled and which were enabled. And if you didn't have a hard drive connected, then that had that hard drive controller disabled. If you had a VGA adapter in there, it disabled the MCGA planar video. And so it kind of kept track of that, kept track of a little bit of the diskette controllers and everything else too. But it's just, I wanted to show that how that cable just flipped over, and it has that perfect length and kind of folds in there. I guess it's folded, one way differently, close to the planar connection than it would be if it were connected to that B drive position. But the fold on this end, that length is just perfect for going into the front of that pass-through adapter, and then has for the adapter connection to connect up that external 4869. And in this case, this was only able to run on the Mall 30 the 360 kb version, which is the 4869-001. Was not able to run the 4869-002. That is the 1.2 megabyte model. And we'll see that mirrored in the microchannel pass-through connection that's very similar to this adapter a little bit later on when we start looking at the Mall 70 being that microchannel unit coverage. But this is, a good place to go through. We'll pull the Mall 30 down and get the Mall 70 back up here so we can look at those internal pieces for the PS2s to get the external drive connected to them. Okay, back to the Mall 70 on the table, and we've kept the camera in low and tight again. And this is the unit that we had up for demonstrating the GoTech adapter. You can, on the previous video, you can go through and review that. We don't have the Mall 70 connected or powered up at all at this section as well. I think I'm going to go through and I'm going to swap out the hard drive. I've got a blank one in a Mall 55SX I noticed earlier. That's a lower capacity, and we'll just swap it in for the later section of the video, just because it's blank. When I go through and install the software on the system for this Diskette adapter A later on, I want, and there might be the consideration, do I wanted to put one of these Diskette adapter A's on a Mall 55SX, and so it may be as easy as loading the software on the drive, and then I can run through and configure the system once I install the adapter, and I don't have to install that option diskette for the Diskette adapter A when I shift to that system. Now, we did have in the plot line for that GoTech video was that I had this passive pass-through setup where IBM designed the bay adapter that goes in the B slot, just like we're looking at a comparable level to the Mall 30 setup, to where it takes that B drive signal, has the bay adapter that it's able to go through and puts it onto the ribbon cable. We also looked at those bay adapters on the Mall 80 videos, just because I had the same level thing in there on that Mall 80, and these were fairly common with IBM. Now, IBM in the there's a little sealed booklet. I'm not even going to open this up. I'm going to still leave it sealed. I've gone through, I don't know if I have any of these other ones that are unsealed, but it has little binder pages that you added when you put one of these adapters in, and it shows all the components and what's included in there. And there's not really that hard of instructions for installing these. It had the ribbon cable, just as we see here. And I think IBM had just that one length. And I mean, they accounted for a bigger case like the Mall 80 of what cabling they would need to reach where the adapter could be. on the Model 80 in the lower section. And as I showed, I went through on the video and setting up the that Type 2, I think is Model 90 is what had that this bay adapter and everything. But me going through and moving around this adapter just to get it in a better position for how that cable feeds. And as you can see here, the problem with the Model 70, and that was part of my plot line, that this cable is just folded back on itself to be just jumbled up here and kind of jammed in here on the side. Not a really good fit at all for the system. Just a lot of extra pieces getting in the way. And this, again, being a close-up of that, of the microchannel version of that pass-through adapter. And see if I can kind of get the full length of that. And this didn't need the ROM BIOS extension hanging off the bus. I mean, those higher level microchannel systems, they were very familiar with what a 360 KB diskette drive was, and they could account for one being installed. Later on, when IBM replaced this pass-through adapter, of course, with the Diskette adapter A, that'll show, I mean, they had drivers for it. And there's actually, I'm going to show loading that software because on boot up, we get to where it recognizes the drive and shows the capacity and everything like that. And as we saw at the end of the GoTech video for those configurations errors, as I was running through the reference diskette and put on the ADF, it was complaining at the end and kind of threw me for a loop that the diskette, external diskette drive wasn't connected. And it was, that is what that 162 error that it was complaining about. But this is the same sort of simple pass-through, has that ribbon cable connection here, and takes it to where you have the external DB37. In this case, these sorts of connections were from the IBM PC era, where that floppy diskette controller was even capable of running 4 drives, 2 internally and 2 externally. And through these DB37 connector, and notable in this case, IBM doesn't supply any power to that external diskette drive in this case. And we'll be going over that. I'll be going over that with also the. I have a 4865 drive, 720 KB. That I'll be able to show the connections for it as well. And showing those external diskette drives will come a little bit later. We'll go over the ins and outs of that. This is still a little bit of the area for showing how the PS2s got that connection out to that external connector in this case. Now we went through and kind of get these in the right order, I guess, to show as well that I went through and installed that Diskette adapter A to replace and give a little bit more of the logic, to not being replacing the capabilities of this, since this passive adapter is only able to run the 4869-001 external diskette drive. Once again, it's not able to run the 4869-002. So using the Diskette adapter A gives us that ability. I mean, I would be able to pull out these components being redundant in this case of the bay adapter, then this passive adapter out of the system now, just to have that Diskette adapter A. Now, this is an older version, and I did send the diagram to Lewis. I don't know if I sent him one of the actual cards or if this is the only card I found, but I've only seen this particular one, and evidently he was aware of it. I mean, the way he put it on the page, he talked about where people can encounter the this older version, and it's notable for this, besides moving the connector a little bit, the internal connector. I mean, it has all these logic level chips. It's very crowded on that microchannel board. But it does have the floppy disk controller chip, and this adapter does not depend on that receiving signals from what's going to that B drive or anything like that. It's just for adding on, more diskette drives to the system, and primarily that external diskette drive, but the Diskette adapter A was also for those internal drives, and I'll cover that when I do the series or the video on the internal drives a little bit more. But the idea is that I want to even provide at this time, and I'll cover this a little bit later, these connectors, even with the IBM PC series, as I said, it's supported 2 external floppy diskette drives. And sometimes those are even in their own enclosure together, and a very large enclosure in this case for being those big full height 360 KB floppy diskette drives. And most people are used to the 34-pin ribbon cable, and this is, in this case, for this internal connection, there's just the data on this connector. There's not any power over this to connect up this to anything like the internal PS2 drives that just had the 34 pins for both data and power. This is for a conventional floppy disk or diskette drive connection. And the noble thing is both of these connectors, both the internal and external, are only able to run one diskette drive for each connection. If you have the twist in the cable, and I'll figure out when I get covering the internal drives, and there are particular drives that IBM had connected up to these on particular levels of systems. I'll cover whether that cable has that twist in it or not. If it's just a straight through 34-pin cable, a lot like this, to where it, IBM may have even reused this sort of connector to go in there and go to what would have been the edge connection of that standard floppy diskette drive for like a 1.2 megabyte internal drive or 360 KB. So we'll get into that in a later section, but I did want to specify that these connections are only able to handle the connection of one drive, not 2. And the 4869 and 4865 drives, I mean, that's just one drive in that enclosure anyway for those external diskette drives. Now, the early version had these 4 switches, and there's Lewis covers in his page. There may be even a particular configuration where the board is set a particular way. Microchannel normally tries to avoid having a switch or jumper settings as a configuration. But this old adapter, original adapter, did have that. They give the FRU and the part number and the FCC identifier, and made in Japan. And so this is the newer version, effectively, of that Diskette adapter A. And these are even, on the tab, it has the identifier label up here of the of what it is. 5.25 inch diskette adapter /A. And this new version doesn't have any of the switches on there. They've gone through a lot more, minimalized a lot more of the parts. Looks like a specific chip that takes replaces a lot of the chips that were on that older version. And this adapter for the diskette adapter A functionality is a lot more common. Is just about every diskette adapter A that you run across will be this style, not that older style that I showed. It still does have the floppy diskette controller, and this is basically an Intel 8272 compatible, or that NEC 765 controller chip. And of course, this being on a few of the planers for running the internal diskettes on IBM systems, or the modern replacements, going up to the 82077 floppy drive controller that's able to run the 2.88 megabyte internal drives. That'll be part of those going over the internal diskette drives at that later point. So, but this is functionally equivalent. It does the same functions for connecting up the same diskette connections, same limitations of one drive for each connection. And they did move the internal connector back a little bit further, whether that was, who knows, for whatever position, or whether that was for the idea of getting it more of in a position or a location for better connections to the PS2s it would run on. And as part of that coverage of the internal diskette drives, without that having the power on that connection, the power for your internal diskette drive has to be supplied otherwise. And so a lot of the PS2 series with microchannel, I mean, those early models like the Mul 50, the Mul 70, Mul 55SX, they did have an internal drive power connection. And that's not an issue for the 4869 and drives, because they have their own internal power supply that you even connect up an AC power to it in this case to run those. So this was commonly on the PS2s, the microchannel PS2s that did have separate internal power connections if you needed for the hard drives and the internal diskette drives, like the Mul 60, 65SX, and Mul 80. And of course, we did see on the GoTech video the other day, they don't have the ADF, the adapter description file for this adapter on the Mul 70 and Mul 80 reference diskette. And even that later version that we ran of the reference diskette, I think it was 1.12, or I'll have to look a little bit more at that video to see. So, and this did have an option diskette for it that has that ADF and has the other files. We will go through, and on this Mul 70, we'll run through that software driver installation and seeing what that does as well. So one of the last areas I wanted to go through on the connection aspect and we'll get even looking at the 4869 drives themselves. I can probably do that as a prelude for once we get connected and get everything going for the on the MUL 70 of running that diskette adapter A. But this is the connection that you would find for the model of the P70 or P75, and those were those so-called portable units. I mean, they had the handle. You still had to be connected to AC power because they didn't have battery in the unit, but they had that orange plasma screen that would kind of like a suitcase that opened up. The flap of the suitcase arrangement came down, and you had the keyboard, and then you tilted out the orange plasma display and floppy diskette drive. Well, on the back panel, it had this particular connection, and it's a Hosiden connector is what it's named. But this was just this dongle was what you put on your P70 and P75. The P75 being the 46 based replacement was a little thicker than the original P70 and had more microchannel slots in the back, and also was based on the 486 DX CPU rather than the 386 like the P70 was. And just that dongle provided the connection to the 4869 external drive in this case. Okay. I'm doing all this as one take. I'll probably get through once I go to show the drives. I'll probably move this off, and that dongle came in this box, external storage device cable. But that was for, we even have the part number for that cable for the P70 and P75 were the models that covered. And then we're getting, like I say, to that connection for these 4869 drives of that 37 pins in there, and just being data that goes over this connection. Pretty thick, relatively inflexible cable. This is kind of, you get this cable into connected to your system, and it's quite a long cable. I think it might even be like a 5 or 6 foot long cable in that regard as well. So let me go through. I'm going to take the MUL 70 down again, and we're going to get I'll go over and show the 4869 and the 4865 drives up next here. Okay, we're still with the relatively close-in camera angle, and I may even go through and just have that where we connect up the external diskette drive to the MUL 70 and configure the software. I think I'm just going to throw that in another video that I can kind of go through and arrange later tonight, just to keep these things a little bit shorter, and I can render them a little bit quicker, and get this one up, and maybe have a little bit of supper before I go through and work on the other video, and so I'm not here too late tonight rendering one big video. And I'm going to go over the 4869 drive first here. And as I said, this cable, it looks to be a good 6 foot, at least over 5 foot to me. And relatively, I mean, I don't know what the metric conversion would be, but close to probably, I mean, more than 3/8 inch thick, close to a 1/2 inch thick for the that cable with the DB37. And it does, just kind of showing on the back, it's a rather big assembly, and I wanted to see where I looked on the comp.system.ps2. the CIF news group, the Comp Sys IBM PS2 hardware. Get it correct here. News group, because I believe Louis Olin used to refer to these as battle floppies. This big assembly. And on the back, you can see the AC power connection, because it does have a power supply in here. And all it does is it takes that cable, and it has a conventional internal floppy drive on the inside of this case. I mean, I've opened up some of these, and it's very easy to go through and work on these on the inside, get it opened. Now, and of course, you have your orange flip power switch that people really love, the sound and the feedback from that switch. And you do see a little bit of the dirt and everything else on these units. I apologize, to get them cleaned. Now, and of course it has the badge, IBM 4869. Doesn't really elaborate. I mean, there's a label. I guess if we're showing the system, showing the label. And it says type 4869 there. So I guess that's IBM's being very generic to where they're not really listing the whether it's a -001 or -002. But the way to tell on that is this is a 001 unit. It has the asterisk. And IBM did that sometime on diskettes to kind of differentiate. You had an asterisk that would be on the eject button, and we'll get into that when we cover the internal diskette drives. But with that asterisk there, right below the access light, and this access light is yellow, as we'll see when we go through and load the drivers. It is a 360 KB diskette drive that's here. And that same convention holds true if that diskette drive were installed in a system to a PS2 or be it that asterisk means it's 360 KB. No asterisk there means it's a 1.2 megabyte diskette drive. We'll also get into a little bit, and these would have been less common with the PS2s to be external. These, and again, the grime and the yellowing. The one of these even has marker on it and everything else in not really good shape. But these would be probably not for PS2 use, because the PS2 is natively having that 3.5-inch drive. Now these are 720 KB diskette drives that are in here, being that there's no marking on this big button. And again, we'll talk about big buttons, small buttons later on when we look at the internal diskette drive types. But this would have been more common with like the wheelwriter typewriters that even had the monitor on them, the display, to be almost like a standalone word processor where you could see on the screen less than a computer to be able to do these. Now, and even for the PC series, this would have been more common, or like the AT. And that gets into the aspect. And these are the 48695 drives. Now this one, a little bit less yellowed, a little bit cleaner, has that 37-pin connector, like you'd expect, but otherwise does not have any connection for power. So IBM in some form, and I'll probably look inside these at a later point. That might even be a little good video idea to show the insides of the 4869 drive and to show the insides of these drives. This did not, I mean, IBM had to put power over some of these pins on that connector. I'm going to use my mute on my microphone. I have to look at my audio level when I cough as well, um, to make sure that wasn't recorded. But using the cough switch on that microphone now for these just extended take on these videos, but that not having any power connection, like I said, some of those pins, and that's what I'd look at when I have those open to see what pins that IBM had set up for carrying power to those. In that standard convention like they had with PS2s, maybe this is where they got the idea that, hey, we can put both power and data all in the same connection, make it a little bit less conventional. And this would have been going through, like I said, probably a little bit more common with the PC series. And this has that separate 4-pin connection that the PC provided. You plug this in to the adapter as well, typically for those units, or they had a way of using that supply. And so really, unless these some of these pins are the ones that they put the power over or no connects, I don't know how interchangeable the two drives, being so similar otherwise, would be functionally equivalent of each other, or where you could use, they would have the same FRU, field replacement unit, of the other. And I didn't see, I mean, they're both marked as 465 drives. And there's not really any marking otherwise to differentiate that one. You don't see any unique FRU. There's nothing on that little badge other than the IBM logo to show that these were treated any differently, that one was for one system and would not function in another system. But that's the basics of the IBM variants of the external drives. And so, as I say, probably in that later video, I'll get to covering the installing the software on the MAL 70, running through that just as it is. So that wraps things up. And since we didn't have any power applied or any sections that I needed to go over, or any discoveries, I guess, other than the dirt and grime of these things, I don't have to do any outtakes. So we've got a little bit more content for the channel. If you do like what I've covered, please click on that like button. But this is IBM Museum. Thank you. So I do have a little bit of a possibility for an outtake here. This is from the comp.sys.ibm.ps2.hardware news group, not all that long ago, a little bit more than a year ago, of Louis Oland saying that the P70 dongle, and I'll show that in a moment, what that was, an auction with that, either buy it now or make an offer, and he says, hooks up your battle floppy. So your life is complete for having heard that. Here is what he was referring to. So it's time to get this video up and get it rendered and online, and then I'll be back later on with the MAL 70 to run through the software component side of it, and we'll get this 4869 drive connected to that Diskette adapter A board and get it running. Look to see you then. Thank you.